Okay. Hi. Thank you for all those kind words. You know who I am. Back in 2012, I had the pleasure of spending a couple of weeks in Russia and the Ukraine on a history trip, and had the opportunity to visit a couple of communities in the Ukraine as well as in Russia. A beautiful country, size of Texas. So we're not talking about Delaware, we're talking about Texas, huge country. In fact, the second largest European country after Russia. What I'm going to talk about today is two parts. The first part is the aggression by Russia, invading Ukraine back in February, and the ongoing humanitarian crisis. And I'm going to make an appeal to the club members to do something about it. So here we go. It's hard to say what Putin's motives are, but we think that part of his concerns are that NATO expansion up to the border of Russia has made him very, very nervous. Even though in our brains, NATO is an offensive alliance, from his perspective, NATO membership of former Warsaw Pact countries makes him very nervous. So that was one of his demands. Restoration of Russian greatness. One of the things when I was traveling in Russia was the resurgence of icons related to the old Romanov dynasty. The double-headed eagle is used as Russia's national emblem now. The monasteries have been reopened. Lots of trappings of the old Russian Empire. As the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, Russia had an identity crisis. And I think part of Putin's motivation is that he wants to leave a legacy of greatness. Unfortunately, I think that he's going to be in a different category. The world will remember him as an aggressor. Also, the reunification of the Rus nations. These are ethnically similar countries, Russia, Belarus, and the Ukraine. Kiev was actually the historical, cultural center of the Rus people. So there's some motivation going on. What can we in the West do? We've been doing it. The UN censures, economic sanctions, providing Ukraine arms to defend themselves, freezing Russian assets, including Russia from the SWIFT banking system. What's next? I'm not quite sure. I think it's pretty reasonable to say that the United States is not going to go to war with Russia over the Ukraine. That would take it to a potential global conflict from a regional conflict. It also has more far-reaching. Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. It also has some far-reaching implications going forward. This is truly a test of Western leadership versus authoritarian states. We have enemies out there. The more familiar ones are Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. But there's a bunch of other authoritarian states that want to test Western resolve. So they're all anxiously looking at the outcome of this. Okay? There's a German term called Realpolitik, the practical politics of the world, if you will. And this is why the Ukraine matters. The future of the West and the future of the Ukraine matters. So next slide. I mentioned Putin's concern about Western encroachment. The blue represents NATO prior to I can't read it. Thank you.
97.
All of the orange, former Soviet Union provinces or part of the Warsaw Pact is new membership in NATO since then. The Ukraine was making noises about joining the NATO alliance, the defensive alliance, which would basically push the boundaries right up against Russia. And you can see the size of the Ukraine compared to the rest of the European countries.
Right.
So from Putin's perspective, a very real threat. Next slide. Okay, what is the Ukraine? Population about 42 million, ethnically about 78% Ukrainian, even though they share a very common historical ethnicity to the Rus people, okay? 17% Russian. Most of the ethnically Russians are in the eastern part, the Donbass area, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. 90% Christian, most of that Russian Orthodox. Second largest country, I've mentioned that already, second largest country in Europe after Russia. Very fertile plains, breadbasket of the Soviet Union. Kind of interesting, Ukraine exports lots of grains and wheat. 40% of Africa's imports come out of the Ukraine.
Wow.
So right now there's a blockade. No Ukrainian ships are moving out of ports. Grain in the fields are going, are being ruined. The Ukrainian economy they've lost about 50% of their production. It's hard to farm when you got tanks rolling through your wheat fields. Okay. And it does have global implications, economic implications. Resources, lithium, really important in batteries. For all you that drive electric vehicles, lithium is critical. Natural gas, timber, and aluminum production. Okay. The Donbass region, which is the eastern part of Ukraine, is part of their industrial heartland. As you move west, it looks like Kansas. Let's see what else I read. Oh, yeah. So center of Slavic culture, we talked about that. 13th century Mongol invasion, they were occupied by then. Between the 13th and 17th century, Ukraine was independent. It was a duchy. It had some identity. It came under the Russian Empire in the 17th century, and then gained independence after the October Revolution and the fall of the Russian Empire. 1917 to 22, independence. 1922, forced into the Soviet Union, right? 1929, millions of Ukrainians died because Stalin shipped their food to other parts of the Soviet Union. Millions of Ukrainians died in 1929 because of the Soviet Union. There is no love between the Ukrainians and the Russians, okay? And then since the demise of the Soviet Union, Ukraine has been independent since 1991. In 2014, unfortunately, I was in the Ukraine before 2014, Russia invades southern Ukraine, occupies the Crimean Peninsula, which if you follow, you see everybody see where Ukraine is? No. It's that kind of orange tannish stuff. See, there's looks like an island right below. That's the Crimea. It is where the Russian Black Sea Fleet is. It's strategically critical for Russia to control it. When it was ceded over to the Ukraine in 1991, Russia got kind of like the Panama Canal, kind of like Guantanamo Bay. There was a lease agreement, but that lease agreement was coming up. Putin doesn't like to not be in control. So I think that was one of the tippers on the 2014 invasion of the Ukraine. And the West essentially turned their back on Ukraine. Why? Great question. We were busy with other things in the world in 2014. Nobody was willing to make the commitment. The Ukrainian country didn't have a trained military. Next slide, please. I'll actually go into it. So again, looking up Ukraine. Russia took a gamble in 2014. They said the West doesn't have the commitment to the Ukraine. Ukraine wasn't part of the EU, is still not part of NATO. So, and the Ukraine was trying to figure themselves out. As in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, oligarchs came into being. These are basically, think of medieval times, fiefdoms, okay? Run by kind of gangsters or entrepreneurs. Same thing exists in the Ukraine. And they didn't meet all the Western criteria for introduction into the EU and into NATO. And the world was looking elsewhere. So Putin made a gamble. He grabbed the Crimea, grabbed part of the Donbass area of eastern Ukraine, and then looked at maybe doing this again, getting the land corridor. And as you see now, the part of Ukraine that's occupied by the Russians is in red. They attempted to grab the whole country back in February. They thought Putin's advisors who don't challenge his view of the world. So what kind of advice do you get? You know, the kind of advice that whether it's real or not, you believe what it is. Otherwise, you get your head whacked. So they said Ukraine is ripe for invasion. The government will, if we invade the country, if we take Kiev, the government will fall. We'll put a puppet government in place, and then we'll control that territory. And they did in February, and it didn't happen. Okay, Ukraine people have risen up, and said, "No, it's our country. We don't want to be part of Russian-dominated world." The quick victory goals didn't occur. Zelensky was elected 2 years ago on a popular vote to change the course of the Ukraine from a very corrupt government with lots of patronage and oligarchs running the place to something more aligned to a democracy, evolving democracy. What were his credentials? He was a comedian. But as you know, Ben, where is he? Ben had to leave. But Ben's started to branch out and go to improv nights. So we might ask Ben one of these days to give us a little bit of comedic relief. But as you know, an entertainer has the ability to shape the audience. And President Zelensky has done a brilliant job at shaping the narrative for the West. So Ukrainian resistance, NATO unity, Russian command and control and logistic failures, moving towards a stalemate. So they shifted gears from taking Kiev to taking the Donbass. Now we're in phase 2 of operations as it evolves. Mariupol, which is a major port city, is under siege right now. It may fall, but there's a lot of resistance going on. They can't control the country. Short answer, can't control the country. So smaller objectives, which would be to create that land bridge between the Crimea and Russian territory. And that's what we see right now. Let's see, how does the war end and how do both sides say face? Next slide.
Oh, Rich, just
Yeah,
quickly.
oh, please.
The area that they are controlling now, are the red area.
Flip it back, please.
Is that the area that has most of the Russians?
Yes, so the eastern part of the Ukraine is called the Donbass. It's the Don River. And there's two provinces there. That's where the concentration of Russian population is. Leading up to this, Russia over the last several years has issued over 800,000 Russian passports to Ukrainian citizens living primarily in the Donbass. So again, shaping the narrative for a future invasion, you create an event in the Ukraine where the Ukrainians are committing acts of atrocity against ethnically Russian. And the Russian citizens who live in the Ukraine have asked Mother Russia for help. So there were lots of narratives leading up to this war. Does that answer your question? Yes.
I have two.
Please, please.
You're going to get rid of them.
Go ahead.
One is, why are we not supplying them the necessary equipment? And two is, if Putin does take over, will he just genocide everybody?
No. So I'll answer the second question first. No. He may be king of the rubble, but he still has a population he needs to control, and there are still resources that need to be exploited. Make sense? Yeah, good question. On question number one, what do you want to send them?
Aircraft,
They can't fly the aircraft.
Yeah, they need to meet there.
So you got to understand that Ukrainians are primarily supplied with their technical equipment with Russian equipment. Now, how we do this is we write a check to Poland, and Poland railroads their tanks, aircraft, helicopters that the Ukrainians can use, are familiar with.
Right.
So Polish equipment that's Russian manufactured will be shipped. Romanian equipment, Hungarian equipment that's Russian manufactured will be shipped to the Ukraine. And we'll write the checks for it. But, you know, other than handheld stuff like the anti-aircraft, anti-tank missiles, fire and forget, you can't hand the Ukrainian soldier an M1 Abrams and go, okay, go. They're going, this is all in English. We don't understand how to operate these things. So it has to be equipment that the soldiers are familiar with using. Does that make sense?
Well, we have to take our military in there.
We're not going to do that. NATO is very explicit about not involving NATO ground forces to include U.S. forces in the Ukraine. Ukraine has got to defend itself. Now, we're going to supply them every piece of
To
equipment
do it.
that we can
Right.
to help them beat the Russians. But it's their fight, and we're not prepared. The world right now is not prepared to go global.
So can we send something through Poland, our stuff to Poland?
Again, we can do the shoot and forget stuff, okay? So you've got an anti-aircraft missile that's man-portable, and you look through the sights and you push this button and it launches, and then you throw the housing away. Yes, we can send tons of those. Same with the Javelin anti-tank missiles, we can tons of those. But sophisticated equipment that requires years of training, even American soldiers training, it's useless. So unless we're prepared to send surrogates, advisors, it's not going to happen. So we're doing what we can, and we're doing it in a escalating way.
Yeah. Why don't they send in UN peace?
The UN has to vote that in the Security Council. One veto is it. Well, who's a permanent member of China and Russia are permanent members of the Security Council.
They're gonna say.
The Russian member of the UN, when the UN passed the resolution to go into Korea, wasn't present at that time with the vote being taken. Well, he got shipped back to Moscow right away. Because he wasn't present, the Russians weren't able to veto UN involvement in the Korean War. Okay. But that's the wall you get up against. So, yeah.
In your opinion,
Yeah.
the new administration, weakness, I should say, maybe it's a better word, had the previous administration retained office, do you see this happen?
That's a hard question to answer.
Your opinion, I said.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
so I'm going to tell you what I believe.
Okay.
And I lean, like most of you here, I lean right. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you is realpolitik. The facts, not the noise that's out there. Biden is doing the best job that he can under the circumstances. Okay. What could President Trump have done differently? Threaten war with Russia? Sure. You know? And what happens when that line gets crossed by Russia? Should we then step back and go, oh, we really didn't mean it? Or, so I think he's done the best job that he can. I mean, we can quarterback it and say, not enough time, wrong mix. It's like COVID, you're just trying to figure it out as it's emerging. That's my 2 cents worth. I think he's doing the best job that he can under the circumstances, under the pressures that he's receiving. President Trump might have done it differently or might do it exactly the same. This is politics aside. This is a reality here, and I want to make sure that we don't take away from the humanitarian crisis. The second part of this. Yeah, please.
My question is if we're sending money to Poland for them to send Russian equipment to Ukraine, are they not going to turn around and rebuy?
They being who?
From Poland.
Oh, yeah.
Are they not going to take U.S. money? So are we not actually?
No. Great question. What we're doing, so what we're doing is we're replacing Russian equipment with American equipment and NATO equipment. So who's going to come out of this? The Poles are going to have brand new equipment.
Oh,
Right?
we're sending them old stuff, new stuff, they send the old stuff.
Yeah, they're sending their Soviet-made equipment to the Ukrainian army, which can operate it,
Right.
right? And we're backfilling Poland, Romania, Hungary with NATO equipment and US equipment. It does another thing, a byproduct of that is that there's been a lot of discussion about the interwoven economic reliance on Russia by Europe. So it's breaking some of that interreliance, because if your country is reliant on Russian manufactured goods, whether it's military or civilian, but if we're changing that narrative to now it's Western manufactured goods and military equipment, that's less reliance on Russia. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So quick question. Do you ever see the other neighboring countries, them jump in and help?
Militarily, no. I do not see any of the NATO nations stepping in, because that will escalate to a global conflict. You cross, so we got crazy man at the head, right? We cannot use Western common sense and Christian values on Putin, right? He's been in power for almost 20 years. He's gone through, I don't know how many US presidents, right? And he's been in power because he's the baddest ass in Russia.
Right.
He has to contend with the Russian mob, the oligarchs. Yeah. So he's a control freak. So his world is not our world. His values are not our values. He has a great need to have a legacy as the next Peter the Great, right? The next Stalin. The route he's taking is going to make him the next Hitler. The aggressive. Okay. Next, go ahead. And the next slide, please.
That's right.
I don't want to run out of time.
In your opinion, why did we not better supply Ukraine or via Poland or however in the many months while this was all being staged?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll give you a quick answer and then move on. But I think the quick answer is if we plussed up, and that's a good question to ask, if we had plussed up military support to the Ukraine in the months leading to February, the invasion, then that gave President Putin more justification to go in. So do I know if we pre-positioned equipment forward? Yeah, we started to. We started pre-positioning U.S. forces. We started pre-positioning U.S. equipment. We started militarizing some of the bases in the neighboring. So we were doing that, but we were doing it in an overt way to add more justification for him going in. Why did he go in? He said, I'm going in to save the Russian people and to denazify the Ukraine. It's bullshit, right? But if he also said, yeah, and look how the West is sponsoring militarization of the Ukraine, it justifies me to go in to protect Mother Russia. So it's a balancing act. So there's a term in China called Riding the Tiger. If you've been in my class before, you've seen this slide. And it basically says, he who rides the tiger is afraid to dismount. Because if you get off the tiger, it's going to eat you, right? Okay. If you stop the war before you're ready, you're no longer president of Russia. He's got to figure something out, okay? And he has to see it through to whatever conclusion it is. Next slide, please. Okay. These are some of the ways out of the Ukraine crisis. Putin wins militarily, secures peace through annexation. Hard one to sell. Ukraine wins. Hard one to sell. Stalemate. They just grind each other down. Probably more likely.
For how long?
Don't know. Don't know.
So once
You
I'm
know?
dead.
You know, how long has Russia been involved militarily in Chechnya? 20 years? How long have they been involved in Syria? 5 years, 7 years? You know, so it's a possibility. Escalate to de-escalate. This is one of Russia's doctrines. You commit something that weapons of mass destruction, use of weapons of mass destruction, whether it's a tactical nuke or it's gas, to dramatically change the path that this conflict is going. And then you step back and go, are you ready to negotiate now? What did the US do to end the war with Japan? Same thing, okay? May 9th is an important date. It's the Russian victory over the Nazis in 1945. So he's probably whipping his generals and his soldiers to take Mariupol and then to have enough territory where you can go to a settlement by the 9th. We'll see if that happens. Negotiations, you can see the negotiations right here. How much time do I have left?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, great. So please, no questions at this point. We've run. Next slide. Let's talk about the humanitarian crisis. A country of 42 million, 13 million are displaced. They no longer live in their homes. That's 1 in 4. Look around the table. If there's a table of 4, one of you no longer is at that table. 3 in 4 children in the Ukraine have been displaced, no longer live in their homes. Of that amount, 7 million are refugees living elsewhere right now. This is massive. About 10,000 civilian casualties, about half of that's killed. And they're uncovering more and more bodies every day. 63 billion in destroyed homes, shops, businesses, and infrastructure. Food and water, medicine, basic needs and services are in short supply. The Ukrainian economy is shattered. There's a 50% production decrease. If they're not selling wheat, if they're not selling lithium or aluminum, then they're not producing money. So they're reliant on the good graces of the West right now. It does have a global, and I already mentioned this before, it has a global effect on grain, gas, oil exports. Next slide, please. Okay, here are some slides of, you know, imagine you're living in your house, you're living in your apartment, and it's blown to shit by Russian missiles, and you're wondering why? What have I ever done to the Russians, right? And now you've got to find another place to live. Just very, 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 very sad. The human suffering, I don't care about the politics aside, the human suffering is just unpalpable. Next slide. Okay, what is Rotary doing? Rotary, through their disaster relief fund, 100% of their disaster relief fund goes towards Ukrainian relief. Direct relief through grants. So local Ukrainian or surrounding country Rotaries can apply for grants. Money is used specifically for humanitarian relief. Shelter boxes.
Sorry, go back.
That's okay. You can see the tents from the shelter boxes down there. There's also lots of European countries that are shipping Rotary supplies directly into the Ukraine and the surrounding countries. Next slide, please. This is in the Ukraine, so you can see Rotary doing great things in the Ukraine. Next slide. Okay, what can you do? Like I mentioned, Rotary International's Disaster Relief Fund is the main conduit right now. Direct contributions. We're also partnering, Rotary International is partnering with UN and NGOs in surrounding countries and in Ukraine, you can make a difference. And several of you in this room have made a difference with contributions. You know, we sit here eating our breakfast, and there are people that don't have homes or breakfasts to eat. If you are so moved, make your check payable to Rotary Foundation, memo Ukraine relief, that will go directly, 100% of it will go directly for Ukrainian relief. It's a deductible expense, so your businesses can make that deduction. The focused relief efforts of 100% of disaster relief funds go through the 30th of April. You can still make donations through the disaster relief fund with the memo Ukrainian relief after the 30th of April. This country has got to rebuild itself after it gets resolved and the media moves to the next flavor of the week. You still have 13+ million people displaced. You have 7 million living outside. You have homes and businesses destroyed. So it's going to be a long haul. I think it's going to be generational before we see Ukraine back to what it was pre. So the club goal is 5,000. We have reached, thank you, Dale, for a contribution this morning of $1,000. So we are up to 4,200 club donations. So we're shy $800.
I'm at 100 today.
That's not, thank you. That's not much. $800 is not much. If you are so moved, write a check, give it to Hal. You also get, whether you care about not, you also get Paul Harris Fellow credit. But more importantly, it goes directly to those that are in need. Questions about humanitarian relief? Yes, Jim, please.
You talk about after this is over.
Yeah.
Rebuilding. The oligarchs they're the same as the Russian oligarchs. They're the Ukrainian.
Yeah.
Ukraine has the lowest per capita income in
Yeah.
all of Europe. 80% of the wheat, they're tremendous. It was a Neptune missile that shot that sunk the sheriff. You know where they made that, designed and built the Neptune? Ukraine. It's a Ukraine product. But that's all managed by the haves. And then you've got all these people that are have-nots, and they're the ones being blistered right now.
Yeah.
So how do, and I don't, it's rhetorical, how do we change them into more of a people democracy? Is a comedian going to do it? Does he have the support of the oligarchs?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim, and I appreciate the argument. I appreciate the answer that you, or the article that you sent me too. So Ukraine is not perfect, right? Let me answer the question.
We gotta go.
Let me answer the question.
That's fine.
I can answer the question.
Go ahead,
You can
wrap
answer the
this
question
up.
because I think it's an important question. So Ukraine isn't perfect, but the Rotary Foundation sends donations directly to those that will then help the people, the have-nots. So it's not helping oligarchs, but you're right. I think the Western commitment to the Ukraine now and also the rebuilding of the Ukraine will move it closer to democracy than not. You know, Zelensky, 2 years ago when he became president, came in anti-corruption. He can't move that mountain in 2 years. And I bet if we look stretch really deep, some of those Ukrainian oligarchs support the Russians.
Sure.
Yeah, so good questions. Please, if you're moved, write check. $800, we're that close to hitting our goal. And it's a small goal, but it's something. Thank you.
My employees will pay $800.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.